A recent study claimed vegans have more bone fractures. Is this true?
Yes, it's true, and it is concerning, but it's not, to me, terribly surprising. The study was Epic Oxford. It involved about 55,000 individuals, and it compared the risk of bone fracture in vegans with, pesco-vegetarians and semi-vegetarians and lacto-ovo-vegetarians and omnivores. And vegans actually had a 43% higher risk of overall fractures and double the risk of hip fractures. And to put this into some perspective, it means about 20 more fractures per 1,000 individuals over a 10-year time period. And some vegans say, oh, it was a bad study, don't pay any attention to it, but it was not a bad study. It was a decent study, and it was the same population, Epic Oxford, that showed us that vegans and vegetarians have lower rates of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, diverticular disease, kidney stones, cataracts, all those good things. And so, we do need to pay attention to this study. So why did the vegans in this study have higher rates of fractures, and what can we do to prevent them? I mean, we need to look at those things. There are a lot of possible explanations for why vegans had a higher fracture risk. But I think probably one of the most important is they have a lower BMI. They tend to, have healthier body weights. It means that, I think generally it means when you have a lower body weight, you have less bone mass and bone density as a rule. And so when you carry more fat, it means you have more cushioning against falls. It means you have more estrogen, which increases bone density. You have a heavier load on your skeleton, which, we all always talk about bone bearing or weight bearing activities for bones. And what's really interesting though is people who were vegan that had a body mass index over 22.5 did not have a higher risk, but nearly a quarter of the vegans had a BMI below 20, compared to about 8% for the omnivores. So more vegans have super low BMIs below 20, which will increase the risk. They also had lower calcium intake, so they averaged just over 590 milligrams, whereas the omnivores averaged over 1,000, just over 1,000 milligrams. Lower calcium, maybe not such a good thing. They didn't look at vitamin D intakes in this study, but they've looked at the vitamin intakes of this population in previous studies, and they're quite low, much lower than the omnivores. So that may have played a role. They have lower B12 intakes. And again, it wasn't listed in this study, but the same population has been assessed in terms of B12 intakes in previous studies, and they have much lower status. This is a UK population, and they don't do as well as the North American population in terms of calcium intake, and in terms of vitamin D, in terms of vitamin B12. So there may be a significant difference there. Now, there are two other things that I think were kind of interesting in this study. And one is that the vegans actually were more physically active. So then we have to say, well, I wonder if they had more sport fractures than the omnivores because of that physical activity. But they also took far less HRT, or hormone replacement therapy. So it was over 25% in the omnivores, and it was around 5 or 6% in the vegans. So, and of course, hormone replacement therapy increases bone density. So that may have factored in as well. There are a lot of things we can do and we should do to ensure as vegans that we build and maintain strong bones. We want to maintain a healthy body weight and not be underweight, because underweight is a risk factor for osteoporosis. We want to meet the RDA for calcium. So as adults, we're aiming for 1,000 milligrams a day. If you're a woman over 50 or a man over 70, you're aiming for 1,200. So that's a lot of calcium, and it's lower. The recommended intakes are actually lower in the UK than they are in North America, and we don't know which is really ideal. But it's not that difficult to get to those RDAs if you're using some fortified non-dairy milks. You want to make sure you get enough vitamin D. We just talked about vitamin D, super important. Now, this is one, we used to always say that protein increased urinary calcium excretion, so could contribute to bone loss. Now we say the opposite. You need to get enough protein to maintain strong bones, because protein is part of the bone matrix. And although it does increase urinary calcium losses, it also increases bone building activities, and it increases absorption of calcium. So, get enough protein. We need to ensure enough B12. We want to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, because that helps us to retain a more alkaline system, which helps to reduce urinary calcium losses. We want to avoid excessive alcohol. And maybe most important of all, we want to keep telling our bones to stay strong by doing weight-bearing exercises. And so that, to me, is critical. You want to be doing an hour of exercise every day, ideally. That's optimal. So there are lots of things we can do. And even though we're seeing studies that are showing higher rates of fractures in vegetarians and vegans, or vegans particularly, we can avoid that, and we need to take those steps to avoid that.
What impact does diet have on the planet and climate change?
Well, it's I just actually did a lecture on what's going on in the Marshall Islands with climate change, and what we know is that we know animal agriculture is either a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, or is the biggest contributor. Some claim it's one of two, fossil fuels and animal agriculture, and some claim it's even more than fossil fuels. Whichever way you look at it, it is a huge contributor. And what we know is that the foods that contribute the greatest amounts to greenhouse gas emissions are animal products, number one being beef, followed by other meat, and eggs and dairy are, sort of somewhere in the middle. And then plant foods are way lower down, with the except there are a few exceptions, like palm oil is fairly high up, cocoa is fairly high up. But in general, plant foods like beans and vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds are all very, very low in terms of greenhouse gas emissions associated with them. And in fact, there was a study done, published in the proceedings, the National Academy proceedings, or National Academy of Science proceedings. Anyway, this was back in 2016, I think. And they were looking at how much greenhouse gas emissions would be reduced by 2050 if the entire planet followed the World Health Organization guidelines for healthy eating, reduced meat intake, reduced calorie intakes, ate more plant foods, and they estimated it to be close to 30%, 29% to be exact. They also estimated the reduction if everyone went vegan, and they estimated that at about 70%. So that kind of tells the story. We need to, as a global population, shift towards a plant-based diet if we're going to save the planet. I think that just going plant-based may not be enough to save the planet, but I don't think we have any chance of saving the planet if we don't go plant-based. And that's one of the reasons that I get so upset when I see the promotion of keto and paleo and low carb and all of that, saying, eat more meat, eat more meat, eat more meat. It's just, to me, it's unconscionable that we would be promoting more meat when we face this global situation of climate change. And when you think about the number of animals, I mean, I just think about the 70 billion animals a year that are slaughtered so we can eat them, and the conditions in which those animals are raised, and in the conditions in which those animals die. I don't understand how anybody can justify this position of eating more animal products. Anyway, all that having been said, we need to shift. We just need to shift, period. And even if a person just cuts back 50% on the meat they're consuming, that will be a significant reduction in their greenhouse gas emissions. But the further you can get towards a completely plant-based diet, the lower your contribution will be in terms of your carbon footprint. I can remember my son telling me, he phoned me right after this environmental sciences class in fourth year university. And he said, Mom, you're not going to believe it. Everybody in the class had to calculate their carbon footprint today. And my son lived about a half an hour from school and had to drive to school every day. And a lot of his friends rode bikes and took like 2-minute showers and, did all of these wonderful things. And he had by far the lowest carbon footprint in the class. And the other students were just like, no way, how can that be? He drives his car to school every day. And the teacher said, read my lips. He doesn't eat meat. You'll never touch him as long as you eat meat. And that's the reality.